right, guys, I'm Nicolette, and today Brian and I are here with Lisa Anderson. She is the president of LMA Consulting Group, and she's actually joined us before to talk about some supply chain topics. And today she's back to talk to us about supply chain and what's going on in the world and electronics, and she'll be talking to us about a lot of fun stuff. So, hey, Lisa, how are you?
Great, thank you. Glad to be here.
Like I mentioned earlier this year, you joined us on a panel discussion, actually, and we were talking about nearshoring and offshoring. And I figured we'd kick off with the importance of that topic and what's going on in that area right now. What has anything changed since then, or what are we seeing right now in terms of these trends?
Well, I'm definitely seeing that manufacturers are taking action to reshore. It's not as though you snap your fingers and it suddenly happens, but they're definitely taking action. I mean, it's more than saying they're going to evaluate it. They're either reshoring or actively planning to reshore. So, they've realized with the pandemic that not only is their supply chains too lengthy, it doesn't allow them to be as resilient as they need to be in today's environment. But they didn't really have, generally speaking, they didn't have adequate backup sources of supply, ones that they actually used. And they weren't prepared enough to be agile to support the needs with the pandemic. And it really has forced them to do something that they were already leaning towards doing anyway, because of all of the Amazon effect and a lot of the other factors that have been going on in the business for the last several years.
We've been hearing a lot too, because like, for instance, it was a record hurricane year this year. That weather also played a lot into, the supply chain and some of the delays also this year.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I mean, that's been happening for many years. I remember back to when I was a vice president of operations and supply chain 15 years ago, before starting my consulting business. And we had weather delays on some products that we were bringing in from different countries like Brazil. And, we had to have backup supply that was close by, or at least in the US, that we could rely upon. So for sure, weather creates all sorts of challenges, and it has for many years. Weather, natural disasters, all of the above has been going on. It's been highlighted the last several years.
So I read something the other day. It said that there are still 5 million manufacturing jobs still offshore. Right. So, I mean, to me, that means there's a lot of opportunity here. Is that accurate to say?
Oh, for sure, there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, like I said, just because we've been seriously considering offshore reshoring for the last few years. Like I said, the cost has come into alignment certainly for value add products, and that's been like that for several years now. The problem has been that you have to put capital investment into the process up front to bring it back. But it's, the labor cost, for one, has reduced as a percentage of total cost. Second of all, the costs have come into alignment anyway, or are even less expensive in some cases. And they're definitely less expensive in Mexico as well than they are in China. So there's a lot of reasons. And then the Amazon effect has come into play, where customers are expecting rapid deliveries, and that just kind of responsiveness isn't, you can't get that going halfway around the world and expecting to have your customers to know what they want in advance. And then beyond that, we had the tariffs. And so that started to get folks thinking, well, I guess I should do something about this finally. But they were thinking, they weren't acting. Well, certainly not across the board. Some of them were acting. But then the pandemic came, and it's like one thing after another, they finally have realized, in essence, that they need to do something about this. And so they've reevaluated their supply chain network. Not in every case should they reshore, but in many, many cases, they should reshore.
Do you think you're also going to see, you mentioned like multiple locations, right? Not even nearshoring. Do you think what's going to happen is, because there's sort of what you're calling like the Amazon effect there, that they'll have multiple sort of manufacturing facilities or multiple, at least locations throughout the world, not necessarily like one nearshored, one, wherever they're manufacturing it, but sort of scattered around for the bigger companies? Do you see that being something?
Yeah, I think that regional sources of supply is absolutely gaining in popularity. And for that reason, because you really need to be located close to your main customer bases. Now, the US is always going to be one of the places where you need to have manufacturing close to because it's got such a big market and consumer base. But there are other places in the world too. And to your point, if you have built a business in Asia, there's no reason to completely evacuate. You want to have some source of supply located near those customers as well.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, you talk about the Amazon effect, and I guess because we're also talking to an audience of some engineers and electronics industry folks, I guess I was wondering, does the Amazon effect apply to some of those manufacturers? So whereas, we're talking to let's say, components and distributors of components and stuff like that, would you say that that applies to that industry as well in terms of getting parts fast, like with the Amazon effect?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the Amazon effect is more of a metaphor because it really does not matter. Of course, the consumer goods have, they truly expect Amazon-like service because they're ordering, consumer goods. But, I work with all types of clients, like you said, the electronics industry, building products. It really just doesn't matter. Aerospace, which is clearly not a consumer product, and they all have had an Amazon effect impact. And that really means that they're expecting quicker deliveries. I mean, even in aerospace, which has really long lead times, they're much, much shorter is the idea. So it doesn't really matter how long they start. They're expected to continue to get shorter and shorter, like cut in half and cut in half again, those types of things. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but they're expecting that they can basically change their mind, or the supply will just change as it goes forward, if you will. So that can happen in any industry. So whether it's a business to a business or a business to consumer, or it's a middle, somewhere in the middle, it doesn't matter. We're all people, and people are running these companies, and no one can predict with 100% clarity. So basically things change.
So you mentioned sort of, it's what's interesting is it's almost like we're saying, Nicolette, you're bringing up component manufacturers, right? And Lisa, you're talking about sort of that, the being able to get it sort of, when you're requested. Does that mean that the companies who have it on hand, because people expect the quickness, whether it's those components or those other things, they're going to be the ones to sort of excel in this environment versus the ones where they don't really have it on hand. They need to get it and then put it on hand, because you see very different types of distributors, especially in the electronic space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely going to be those people who have it on hand, or that even better, like folks are starting to supply their customers with what they need for them. So, predicting what your customers are going to need, no matter what kind of customers they are, whether they're business customers, consumer customers, it's equally as valuable either way. And if we can just predict what they need and have it where they need it, when they need it, regardless of wherever that is, those are the folks who are going to be successful. And there are strategies that to accomplish that.
So it's sort of the Amazon effect subscription model, right?
Deliver
me 40,000
subscription model.
right. Deliver me 40,000 capacitors on this date, at this time, and
we'll have it there today before 9 p.m.
That's right.
Same day delivery.
Every month on the 15th, I want my capacitors. But
no, it's absolutely true. I mean, even for things you would think that wouldn't ever get to that point, it's absolutely getting to that point because everything is predictable to a degree, especially if you're getting information and you're talking to your customers and your customers' customers, etc. You can get additional information that's valuable and predict even in the pandemic. I mean, it's certainly not as easy, but you can do it.
Yeah, and you're seeing a lot of those distributors now creating like APIs and connections into it, so companies could actually, sort of take a peek inside versus having someone go and look and say, okay, is there this many components? They're able to connect directly to the distributor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, visibility into the supply chain and to
Mhm.
your customers, and of course, to make that happen, your suppliers, is absolutely going to be required going into the future, especially if you would wish to stay in business anyway,
Yeah.
because that's the only way you're going to be able to not only supply what your customer is asking for, but be able to do it in a profitable manner and with additional cash, which means you don't have inventory tied up everywhere
Right.
along the way.
So, and Brian, you mentioned like staying ahead and having that stuff on hand, but
Mhm.
during the course of the pandemic, did you see, Lisa, any whether it be industries or manufacturers in particular that really kind of handled this well, that were set up for this?
Well, it really wasn't necessarily particular industries, but certainly there are some manufacturers that were more proactive and thinking forward. I mean, the ones generally speaking that did better than the rest were those that already had a culture of innovation and were thinking about the future. They were along the digital roadmap already. It's not all about technology, but technology is one of those pieces. Certainly, if they didn't have technology in place, they most likely are going to have a really hard time keeping up with all these changes to customer demand, where their supplies are within their supply chain, and how they can, maybe if they reshore, how do they produce them efficiently? How do they produce them standing 6 feet apart, and all those types of things?
Right.
So there's a lot of folks who are innovating, were on the digital roadmap, and really those that had strong leaders in place that were willing to do the hard thing, if you will. Because, like, for example, when I go back to that, when I was a vice president of operations and supply chain, I was getting constant heat because we were owned by private equity backers, or we had private equity backers. And I was getting constant heat about labor costs, because that's the thing that everyone's been talking about for years and years and years. Labor costs just weren't that relevant to our total cost of the product, but that's what very smart people kept asking me about every single day.
Mhm.
And so luckily I worked with a CEO that was wanted to do the right thing and was willing to fight those battles. So we didn't outsource things that didn't make sense, which was really helpful because our product was very was fluffy and big. So the freight cost was substantial, which if we had to send it from far away, that would be a substantial burden. And actually, even bigger than that was our material cost was a significant component. So, we have, lots of reasons why we shouldn't outsource most of our products. But, I was getting constant pressure. So it's no wonder that a lot of people outsourced, whether it made sense or not at the time. That's what happened. And so now we have to, find a way to it's always harder to undo things than it is in the first place.
Right.
Do you think you're going to see? I mean, you mentioned like, as people build these new facilities, right? Whether they're nearshoring or using multiple locations throughout the world, do you think we're going to see a lot of, obviously we're going to see a lot of connected, but like the industrial Internet of Things, robotics, autonomous warehouses being built, in these new facilities?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's a lot of reasons to do such a thing. One is that it's less costly over the long run.
Mhm.
It costs you less money. You don't have to have as many people who have lower skills, if you will. You
Mhm.
still need some folks that have lower skills, and you definitely need a lot of people who have higher skills, which is one of the challenges because there aren't as many of those available as we'd like. But
Right.
it certainly leads to we can put together retraining programs and go back to our base, because we do have a lot of folks who were when offshoring happened, a lot of those people still exist. They've just been retrained and moved elsewhere. So, there are options. But anyway, yeah, those are some of the reasons that I definitely think that will pursue the more the digital transformation, Industry 4.0, and actually also because of the ability to be resilient. Because if you can change on a dime and you're not just automated, but automated, autonomous, you can avoid accidents. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to be more efficient as well, so that you can be both efficient and resilient in the future.
Right. So I'm thinking about something you said before about lead times, and everybody wants these shorter, and we're expecting shorter lead times, right? And that is expected to happen. But, for example, in the electronics industry, what we're hearing is a recurring problem are these longer lead times. So how do we get there? How do we get there?
Well, it is tricky because in order to reshore, it's going to take time because you have to build these. You don't necessarily have to build a factory or anything. Now, I do think more and more new sites or sites will be upgraded to have these more technical and digital factories, if you will, of the future. However, we can partner with folks who already produce these types of products, and there's a lot of options. The nice thing is that we are pretty creative, generally speaking. So I think that'll go a long way. But that's oh dear. Now I forgot. What was your question? Because I can circle back to it.
Now with everything.
Oh, the lead times.
Right.
Lead times.
I just remembered. So so one of the things is that it'll take us some time. Now we can partner with folks to get a regional source of supply going quicker. It depends. The smarter companies are going to get there faster because they probably have multiple relationships already, and and sources of potential sources of supply and those types of things. But it doesn't have to be all of that. You can pursue multiple channels at once. So, the world will recover from the pandemic, just at different rates. So, really, those people who were set up, if you will, were smarter in the first place, had multiple sources of supply, had ideally, hopefully, these sources of supply in multiple regions around the world, even if they weren't close by, they're going to recover much quicker. Because one of the things about the electronics industry is that it's labor intensive in terms of like the closeness that you have to be next to each other. So that's one of the reasons why like cobots might be a good strategy for the future, but all of that takes some time to implement. So I think it's a matter of priority. So like, how important are you to your supplier? I mean, that relates to how quickly you're going to get your source of supply. Unfortunately, I mean, you can always fly things instead of sending them by boat, but like that's expensive. So I think it's going to be interesting because some folks are going to they're going to see their volume reducing over time, whereas the stronger players are going to get even stronger. So that's good, and it's like unfortunate in a way, just because well, I guess it is what it is. You're rewarded for being smarter in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be tough because, like you said, it's gonna be how important is this company to that vendor, right? How big of a client is it, or how much do they order on a yearly basis? And that's really what it's probably going to come down to in many. And I think that's anything, not even just electronics. I think it's any industry.
Oh, it's definitely going to be any industry. And I think the other thing is how it's related. It goes hand in hand. To my point of view. But if you were innovative in the first place, you probably were doing some of these other strategies I've talked about. But let's just say you weren't and you were innovative, then the companies that are more innovative are going to be more successful because they're going to find there's always like more routes than you think of to get there. And so they'll continue to pursue additional strategies. They'll invent new materials, as an example. It depends, on what industry we're talking about and what's possible. But there's different things that you can innovate. in order to find solutions quicker. So I think that those who have already a culture of innovation are going to certainly be more successful. With that said, I would say don't give up, because if you can quickly, if you can be serious about wanting to innovate and find strategies to be successful, you will find them. And you'll just have to bring on additional help and support to get there quickly. So I wouldn't give up if I wasn't where I needed to be today, but I certainly think you have to invest money and resources, and you have to invest in your digital infrastructure and in innovation, which is perhaps a problem if you don't have cash. So hopefully you at least have something.
Right.
Cash, access to cash, something.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, what about these smaller companies who kind of are a little bit behind the eight ball, and maybe they're willing, what's kind of like the first step they can take right now, being where we are right now, where we stand,
Right.
What is the first thing they should really do?
Well, when I was VP of that company, we started off, when I was promoted into that role anyway, we started off in quite not great shape, because we had just absorbed we had merged a larger company and another smaller entrepreneurial company into our company. We took on more than we could handle, basically. We also were implementing a new system. So we did not have cash. So there are always strategies, even for the smaller company. What you need, though, is you need strong leaders. So if nothing else, you better go find, or hopefully you have at least a strong CEO. If not,
you better
find
find a strong leader
Find one
somewhere.
quickly.
Right.
Find one quickly. But then from there, you can always do something. You can set up arrangements with your suppliers if you can make it a win-win, they can make it so that your payments aren't due. There's always things you can work out with your suppliers if they understand that you have a vision for the future and that you're in it together. There's something you can always do. So you can find some money there to get through. And you also, depending on who your customers are, you can partner with customers. You can partner with competitors. Actually, a lot of the most successful companies find ways to partner with competitors as well. So there's plenty of people that you could partner with, but it requires looking at your business in a new way, and also having some ability to innovate, or at least, you don't have to be everything yourself if you're the CEO, but you need to find those resources. And they could be long-term, like employees, or they could just be consultants or other other companies, or there's a lot of ways to find them. So I would not give up, even if I was a small company, because actually, if you think about it, a small company can make much quicker progress than a large company. You can make a decision and implement it quickly.
Yeah.
You just have to start making some key, important, correct decisions in order to move forward in a smart way, or pick the right partners, if you will, and find a way to make some quick wins in that, and certainly get in touch with your banks. There's other financing opportunities out there as well.
Yeah, it's always easier. Well, sometimes easier being the speedboat versus the battleship, right?
That's right.
That's a really good perspective. Actually, I didn't think of that.
Maneuver a lot easier. So now, so here's a question, right? With all that we talked about and sort of these delays, but the people designing these products, right? How should they be flexible in order to deal with some of these supply chain pieces we've talked about?
Well, I think that you bring up a good point, because consumers and businesses, because after all, we're all people, but business buying behaviors are changing because of the pandemic. Consumer buying behaviors are changing because of the pandemic. And there's a lot is changing in terms of service expectations, in terms of everything. So that's another reason why we need to think about how to think more in terms of innovation, be more agile, flexible, resilient, right, and all those types of concepts. So they're going to pervade no matter what organization you're in. You're going to be more successful if you can do that successfully without losing track of everything else you're doing.
Mm. Brian, do you want to tell Lisa the funny story about your Apple computer? I'm sorry to shout out Apple, but
Okay.
I
Oh,
thought she'd
man.
appreciate this lead
Yeah,
time.
so my the camera, the front facing webcam on my MacBook Pro, sorry Apple, but it died, and so I go into the Apple store. Should I tell the whole story? Just the just the lead
Longer
time
than
on
it would take.
Oh my God, it would take half an hour for me to tell you the whole story, but lead time wise, so I go in, they're like, yeah, I mean, COVID, they're not touching computers. I got it. They're like, okay, you got to leave your computer with us. And it's going to take 3 to 5 weeks for us to look at it and repair it. And I just look at the guy, I'm like, okay, I need to buy a new machine before I could give you my machine and, move everything over. And, like most people, you can't get rid of your computer for 3 to 5 weeks.
No way.
And they were like, well, you can't get a MacBook Pros. They're about 6-7 weeks out before you get a new one. I was like, well, what's the quickest I could get any type of, and they were like, you get the Mac Mini in about 4 weeks if it's not custom ordered. And it was like crazy because if you think about this, for me to get a webcam repaired based on that structure and having to back up my machine, you're talking about 3 months out. It's crazy for a webcam. I'm like, I could just go buy a webcam and add it to my MacBook.
Exactly.
Have it
Attach it to your computer.
Have it tomorrow morning from Amazon with the Amazon effect, and it cost me $79 or whatever the case is. I mean, but yeah, it's crazy.
That's exactly what's been going on lately. So those people who are, there are some companies out there that like a related type of story that are thinking outside the box and just saying, well, hey, what if I send you a camera and then we also send you a computer? Like, otherwise they lose the sale, right? So I'm just saying a lot of times you have to think outside the box and be a little bit innovative and allow your frontline people to think about, what potential options there might be, or, I'll go to my competitor down the street and then get this part of it that's available.
Yeah. And what's funny is their answer was just like, well, you have your, Apple protection till, March of next year. So don't worry about it. I'm like, what? I still need my computer to work.
I still need a computer. But I like Lisa's idea. So Apple should have been like, hey, let's send you a camera. Order your computer right now. You'll have a camera in a few days. And, your computer will be here when it's here, temporary solution.
Yeah.
Right.
I like that.
I think that the people that stand out in terms of customer service in today's environment, and it doesn't always mean that they have to be it's impossible really for anyone to have predicted the pandemic in the exact timing. So you're going to have some sort of disruption, but the people who are more responsive, who are resilient, who think outside the box and, are innovative and, and hopefully have more options, like they've already started dual sourcing, if nothing else, are going to be more successful. So I think that's the customer service that folks either experience or don't experience is going to go a very long way. So people forgetting about their people who are on the front lines is a very big mistake, because actually Talib wrote a book about it, but basically, things that are like noteworthy, like the pandemic, no one's going to forget about the pandemic anytime soon. So we tend to heighten all the things that happened during the pandemic, including you got great service or you didn't. And so people will remember that a lot longer.
What's interesting, we talked about design here, that when I was at the Apple store, they were like, well, the whole screen has to be replaced. We can't just fix the camera assembly, right? So that's a bad design, right? Especially knowing that you may be in terms of, something may happen and you may not be able to get all the components that make up the screen to just replace one. Well, I mean, I know the camera's more than one component, but one of the actual screen, so
it's very true. Like I had an issue pre-pandemic, but where the batteries are now built in and you can't do anything about it. They say, oh, they'll last forever. Well, they don't. They last like a year at best. And then they start failing pretty significantly, and then you have to send them in and all this other stuff in order to get your battery to work. Whereas I used to carry around multiple batteries, and although it was clunky, it worked. Now it doesn't. Now that's not even a possibility. So I actually went to having multiple laptops pre-pandemic just because of this issue that arose. But anyway, it doesn't, unfortunately, I just have had a bad experience sooner, so I was figured it out.
You were prepared. You were flexible.
Lisa Anderson is agile. She's prepared.
That's right.
She's like, I
I
got
got
32
lucky.
batteries in my bag right now.
He's like, hold on, let me open my giant roll-on suitcase full of batteries.
That's right.
Well, Lisa, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about, something that we should expect or be prepared for, or you have a crystal ball as for supply chains in 2021?
I think that, now we're starting to emerge from the pandemic, or we will be starting to, because actually today is the first day, at least in the US, that the vaccine's being distributed. Of course, it's, the predictions are that it'll take until the summer for things to go back to closer to normal, I suppose. But either way, it's going to start ramping up very, very soon. Like by the end of the first quarter, I think, people are going to be anxiously doing more of what they used to do than ever before. So anyway, as the pandemic dissipates, if you will, I think that manufacturers need to be ready. I mean, we need to be prepared, because volumes are going to, if nothing else, for at least a period of time, volumes are going to continue to increase. We have a lot of opportunity with reshoring. I mean, those companies that are thinking about, hey, somebody's probably going to come to me, that if they're already located in a region where there is a lot of consumers, which could be in the US, could be Europe, could be wherever. But if they're located in a region with a lot of consumers and other businesses, then they should be prepared for people coming to them to partner, because they already have some of the capabilities, and they shouldn't even wait. They should go out and pursue people who they might suggest partnering to. And then if they don't have, if they're one of the people who should be pursuing, they should be preparing for increased volume. How can you take some of that volume? How can you reshore more quickly? How can you have multiple sources of supply, more quickly? And it doesn't mean that every solution has to last for 10 years, because who knows what's going to happen in 10 years anymore. Mm-hmm. Clients that are smart are looking at strategy for the next year. I mean, that's like as best as they can do. I mean, it's a strategic sprint, really. And it's like, how do you keep it updated and look out? A year would be fine at this point. And then, you continue to adjust based on what's available to you. So I think that that's going to be the smartest people right now are preparing for a resurgence of activity in manufacturing. And, of course, associated with that is going to be the whole logistics infrastructure. I mean, right now there's a lot taken up in the vaccine as well, if you think about it. So we have to think about the capacity on all of our systems, manufacturing, as well as logistics infrastructure, because we all use the same trucks, ocean carriers, air freight, and by all means, the vaccines are using a ton of a ton of air freight. UPS, FedEx, DHL, United, American was doing test flights. So I think that not as many people are flying right now, but that's going to change. So how do we account for that? And by all means, package shipping and e-commerce has gone insane. So it's not like FedEx, UPS, Amazon, DHL are bored. So anyway, we have to think about all that, because if we want to send our electronics by air, that's going to be more expensive, or it's going to be harder to find capacity because they might be flying a vaccine, which could be considered more important. So anyway, that's one of the things I think, continuing to look out and to make sure you're thinking ahead and are prepared, and are realizing that you need to be on the forefront of both people, like having the right people is very important, as well as the right digital footprint, because you need to be thinking about your what are you going to do? I mean, can't do everything, but Are you going to look at cobots? Are you going to look at a new, I mean, just starting with a solid ERP system so that you can run your business in the modern era would go a very long way. And, you can go from there to more sophisticated software, and even simple things like barcoding and RFID and those kinds of things. There's lots of things you could do. So anyway, I think looking at your digital footprint, looking at your people, and then, of course, the third thing is always process. But I think if you get the right people and you've got, and you're looking out from the digital side, you're most likely going to already be looking at best practice type processes that are appropriate for you and your industry, because people, especially people who are implementing ERP systems, talk about best practice processes, but they're not necessarily appropriate to your company, your situation, or your industry. So that's useless. So you have to think about what matters to you, and then implement those types of processes.
Nice. Brian, do you have anything else for Lisa?
I just see lots of robots in the future.
Brian's still on the robots.
Well, I think that's probably very true. Yeah. However, remember that people and robots have to work well together. So that's going to be the trick. Because actually, one of the things about automation is the more you automate, the more that goes wrong when things go wrong. Because like the I Love Lucy movies from TV show from a long time ago, lots of things go haywire when a machine that's automated just continues to go. They couldn't keep up at all with the chocolate that they were, I think it was chocolate that they were doing. But anyway, that whole concept is totally true with robots. So so you have to have the right combination of people and robots. But you're totally right. Robots are definitely in our future.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. Can you please let everybody know where they can learn more about you? You have a very robust website, a lot of content on there, so you're keeping us all updated. Just let everybody know where they can find you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And speaking of which, I have several newsletters that are free that you're welcome to sign up for on my website, that keep on top of the latest trends and what you should be doing about them. And that's HTTPS, and then it's www.LMA for LMA hyphen or dash, whichever you want to call it, and then consultinggroup.com. So LMA-consultinggroup.com.